Okay, welcome to another iPad painting tutorial. And the painting you can see on screen, I'm going to teach you how to paint this sunset marsh shoreline step by step, make it as easy as possible for you to follow along. Now I'm using the app Procreate on the iPad, but you could probably translate most of this to any other kind of app on a different tablet too. But in terms of this app, I'm using an A4 canvas that's default within the app, and the dimensions of that are 297mm by 210mm at 300 dpi. I've already created a colour palette and got some colours here in advance. If you want to use these exact colours, then they have what we call hexadecimal codes that are linked to each of those colours. All of the codes are down in the video description. You can copy and paste them one at a time or type them in into this area. Within value, within the colours, the colour will appear up here and then you can piece it together yourself. Or there is also in the video description a link that takes you to my Patreon and you can download the colour file there for free. In terms of the brushes I'm going to be using, I have made a couple of modifications to the brushes I'm going to be using. I don't normally do this, but I'm going to be using the soft brush default setting, so I haven't changed that. I'm going to use the medium brush default settings. They're both within airbrushing, but importantly they are the ones at the top and not the ones lower down. I'm also going to be using, within artistic, the leatherwood brush, but I've just increased the spacing to 40%. That's the only modification I've changed with the stroke path. I've put it up to 40% on the spacing, and that will become clear later on. And I'm also going to be using the technical pencil within the inking section too. Before we go any further, if you could just give the video a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell notification. It's really going to help out the channel, and make sure you get future notifications of all my other videos as well. Okay, with all that said and done, let's get started. So on our first layer, we're going to go to our colours, and we have this first colour, and I'm just going to drag and flood fill the entire canvas. It just gets rid of the white, and it's just a nicer place to start. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to go to our colours and choose the second colour this time. I'm going to make sure I'm on the airbrushing and the soft brush at the top of the list. I'm going to put the size of the brush up to 15% and 100% opacity. And I'm going to draw a line right through the centre of the canvas area. And then I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian Blur, and you'll see the little blue adjustments icon is still glowing blue. That's because we've still got the Gaussian Blur active, and you can just slide it across, and I'm going to slide it across to about 50% and then tap it again to deselect. I might just go to the layer and duplicate it, and it doubles up the strength, as you can see. I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to go to my colours again. I'm going to go to the third colour in this time, still using the soft brush. I'm going to put it down a little bit to about 10% size. I'm going to keep it at the 100% opacity, and with this brush stroke I'm just going to aim for just a slight bit below the middle line, just a little bit. If you feel like you've put it slightly in the wrong place, it's not a problem. You can go to this icon, which is the transform tool, and you can just move it to where you need it to be. So just a little bit below halfway for this, but not too much. You can then go to the adjustments again, the Gaussian Blur. Again, we have the slider still active, so we're going to blur that to about 40%. And you can see now we're getting a really nice transition of colours. Go back to our layers, create another layer. This time I'm going to go to the fourth colour along, stay on the soft brush, but I'm going to put it down to about 6%, stay on 100% opacity, and just a little bit lower this time. So it's kind of underneath what we've just done. Gaussian Blur to about 30%, like that. And you can see now you've got this real separation of different areas. And if anything, I think that purple is a bit strong, so we can always just go to that layer, go to the little end symbol and just slide it down. Put it to about 60% opacity on this little slider, and I think that will work better. Okay, I'm going to create another layer, go back to my colours, and we've got these two colours now which we're going to use for some clouds. So I'm going to go to the lighter of the two colours, stay on the soft brush, but I'm going to reduce it down now to about 3% size and much lower on the opacity at around 30%. Then I'm going to start creating some shapes in this sky area, and you can probably hear through the tapping that it's building it up in just dashes in quite a kind of random way. Just keep building it up, leave some gaps, leave some texture. You don't want it to become too much like a round blob like this. You want to keep it quite raggedy, quite sketchy really. You don't need to do too much of this colour because this colour is parts of the cloud that are catching the sunlight, and then we're going to do a dark colour to mostly obscure this colour. So I'm just going to do some breakaway kind of tufts here and a few more. Again, this isn't particularly detailed really. And then let's increase it a little bit to 4% just to get some slightly bigger sections blotted in. Now what tends to happen with clouds is that when they get closer to you, you'll get slightly more distinct shapes, and then as they get further away, they get smaller, obviously with perspective, but then they almost become a bit more flattened out as well. So if you're doing ones in the distance a little bit more, then they might still have a bit of character and a bit of shape to them, but generally they're going to just stretch and flatten a little bit. Okay, so that will do for that layer. I'm going to create a new layer on top. Back to my colours. So we've got this darker colour now, which is 4th in from the right, and it's the 6th colour in from the left. And we're going to stay on the soft brush still, but we're going to put it up, well, so about 3% size, and we'll stay at the 30% opacity. And this colour largely just obscures the colour that we've just laid down. So we're going to see more of the shadow side, but you're just going to get some of the highlighted bits peeking round on the edges. Now, you'll notice I'm not really zooming in fact I'm quite zoomed out. The purpose of these tutorials is to get you to the general effect, teach you the foundations of how to build this kind of landscape, this kind of scene, but you can really refine this to your heart's content. So if you really want to continue zooming in, get some cloud references and really copy them, then feel free to do that. I'm just kind of keep it quite rough. You can get something that's quite realistic by being quite sketchy really. So we'll just continue to build up this shadow part of the cloud. So I'm just going to power through this now just to get some more of this dark texture overlaid, build it up a little bit, and then we'll move on to the other features of the sky. And I'm also going to create another layer, and I'm going to switch to this blue colour here on the second row. It's quite a lot darker, so we need to reduce it down to about 15%. And I can use that now to just in places on this new layer, just darken up bits of that cloud. I feel like it needs to be even darker in places. So we'll go back to that layer, use that purple here first, put my brush size up to 4%. Let's just really go for some of this. There's more to this tutorial than just the sky, so if this is an area that you really struggle with, don't be put off. There's other sections of the tutorial that you might really benefit from anyway. So get your clouds to a point where you're okay with it, and if you need to go back and fine tune it later, then that is fine too. So please don't let a little element like your cloud texture put you off learning some of the other things that you can potentially learn from the tutorial. Cloud textures are something that do take a little bit of practice. It can be frustrating if it isn't quite looking as naturalistic as you would like. It's totally normal. It's part of the practice, it's part of the learning curve, and it still happens no matter how much practice you get with these kind of things. You're still going to occasionally get to a point where it just isn't working for you and you have to keep amending and sticking with it. Okay, so that will do for that layer, and I'm going to go to the layer above again, back to that blue colour, and remember we were at 2% size and 15% opacity. I'm just going to use it again to just darken up some of these clouds a little bit, create that contrast. Okay, I might come back to the sky and just refine it a little bit later on, but we're going to move forward. Okay, I'm going to create another layer, but I'm going to put this layer underneath layers 6, 7 and 8. Go back to my colours. I'm going to choose the second colour in again. We're going to stay on the soft brush. I'm going to reduce it down to the 2% again. I'm going to keep it at the 15% opacity. And I'm just going to start creating some extra little textures in the sky here. Perhaps I'm going to reduce it down even further actually to the lower part of 2%, still on the 15% opacity. And we're just going to create some extra kind of texture across elements of this sky. Not too much, but then maybe as we get lower down, we can increase some of this texture a little bit. So we're just interrupting some of that soft transitioning, just increasing the texture a little bit. I think it can look better. Okay, go to our top layer again and create another layer. We're going to start using some of the colors for the land areas now. So we're going to go to that dark blue and we're going to change brush. We're going to go to the medium brush, default settings, put it to about 3% size and 100% opacity. And we're just going to create our horizon line. So I'm going to do a line first of all. Hold it so it snaps to a straight line, let go, and then we can go to the transform tool and decide where exactly we want it. So it was just easy to create the line to begin with, and then we can really fine tune where we want it to go. So I want to leave enough space underneath to have some water features, but I just want to bring it a little low down in our sky scene. So we've got enough now for a sun area as it's sort of setting. So I think that is about right for me. I don't care about this edge because I'm going to go over it now anyway, but we don't want it as a complete straight line. So I've still got it set to 3%. So I'm going to reduce it now to 2% size. We'll keep it at the 100% opacity. So I'm just going to go along now and make a bit more of a texture along that top line. Maybe I'll even decrease it further. So the lowest part of 2%, and then we'll just go across that and create some swells and dips. So we can have a general area where it's swelling up a little bit more, and you can imagine sort of distant trees on a hill going a little bit higher up. And you can maybe just do little textures that go upwards that, you know, helps you understand them in terms of maybe being trees. And then you can have another area perhaps that again swells up, and then we can have another area that just comes a little bit further down over there as well. So play around with this. You don't want to go too tall with any of this because this is very much distance. And then as we come further in, I'm just going to do the occasional thing that sticks up, but not as much perhaps. I don't want it to be totally flat, so I'm just going to create noise all the way along. And you could always go back in with an eraser too and start to do something with this texture. So if we long press on the eraser, whatever brush we're using is now the same on the eraser. So we've got the medium brush on the eraser. So we can just go in with maybe same size, lowest part of 2% and 100% opacity, and we could just go in and chip away. So a downwards movement now, and just carefully we can start to remove some of this if we want as well. Okay, I don't feel inclined to do too much of that. I think that's absolutely fine. I will go and use the adjustments, Gaussian Blur, and I just want to soften that in slightly. So I'm going to put it to 2%, I think is plenty. It just takes the edge off it literally and just softens it in slightly. So I'll deselect that, and when we zoom in you can see it's just a slightly softer edge, and when it's in the distance it works a little bit better. So we're going to go to our layers and create a new layer, back to our colours, and we've got this colour next, and I'm going to put that up to 3% size on the medium brush and 100% opacity. And again, I'm just going to have a starting point, draw it all the way across, hold it, and it will snap to a straight line. Now it's a little bit off, but again we can go to the transform tool and we can just move it up so it fits where we want it, like that. Then back in with the medium brush, we can just go and make it a little less regular looking, which will work better. And it's a subtle difference, probably quite difficult to pick up on camera, but there is a difference. Now we've got this slightly warmer and darker colour, it brings it a bit forward and it pushes the slightly more bluey colour a little bit further in the background. And what I'm going to do for this is just bring it down a little bit further. We're going to create a slightly irregular set of shapes for this, and what this is going to represent is some of that grass and marsh edge for the distance. So I'm going to reduce it down to the 2% size, and maybe I'll just create some breakaway sections and gaps, because you're going to get kind of bits that come forward almost like elongated blobs where the grass is, and then the water sort of creates an irregular area where it eats into some bits and then less into others. So we can do the same with the eraser. So long press on the eraser, we're already there anyway, we're on the medium brush, but we do want to reduce it down to about 1%, keep it at the 100% opacity. And maybe within these sections we can just start to nibble away and just have some sections where the water is actually breaking it up there as well. Okay, I will create, in fact no, we'll stay on the same layer, but we'll go to the third colour in this time, and it's a darker colour, and it's a subtle feature, but at the top edge of this dark green colour, we'll stay on the 2% size, the lower part of it, stay at 100% opacity, and I just want to create an area perhaps where we have some trees that are just a slightly different tone, and just break apart those different areas. So I want the trees to be dark, but the actual grass to be a lighter tone. So I'm creating a division there between the blue and the green area. We can have some bits that stick up to represent trees or whatever. It's in the background, so we don't really need to be too specific, but something just to divide it up anyway. Like that. Then I'm going to reduce the opacity to about 60%, and on the lower part of these shapes, they're going to have a shadow as well. And also just a little bit of a break in texture so that it doesn't look too flat. But just to give these a bit of heft and a bit of 3D-ness, the lower part of them, we're going to give it a little bit of a sense of shadow. And anywhere where there's a bit of a break, it might just inspire some darker tones in there as well. Just stops it looking so flat when you zoom back out. And then again, we can just give a little bit of shadow at the bottom of these little forms that stick out, and then extend it across certain areas too, like that. Okay, now we've got it to that stage, I'm just going to go back a couple of layers, so my layer 5, and I feel like I want to ramp up some of the colours now. So on layer 5, if I remove it, you can see it's not really very powerful, so I want to put it up a little bit. So I'm going to go to my colours on layer 5. I've got this colour initially, which was the 5th colour in. On the soft brush, I'm going to have it at around 7% size and around 30% strength, opacity. And I'm just going to start building in a little bit more of this in this bottom area, all the way across, just to build it in a little bit more, like that. Then I'm going to go to the next colour along and do pretty much the same thing, but reduce it down to about 5% and also reduce down to about 20% opacity. And I can just build in a little bit more of this just to help soften that effect in a bit more. I think that works better, like that. And now I want to go to layer 4 and do something similar, but I'm going to use this time the really strong red. So because it's so strong, I need to put it down to about 5% strength. I'm going to have it about 10% size. And on this layer 4, I'm just going to increase the warmth in this area, especially around the center, like so. I think that will work really nicely, really help bring the sun in a bit better. And I'm going to do the same with the yellow. So not change the settings, 5% strength and 10% size. And I'm just going to build in some of this yellow too. It's just going to help bring it all together when I start adding the sun in now. So we're going to go to the top layers, click the plus symbol, and we're going to start doing exactly that. So I'm going to go to the white colour. I'm going to put it on the medium brush. That's about 5% size and 100% opacity, and I'm going to decide exactly where I want the sun to be. And I want it to be about there. But I don't want it to be white. I want lots of other colours. So I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to change the properties of that layer from the N, which means normal. I'm going to scroll down the list to the add, and I'm going to move back to the yellow. And let's just check. I'm going to move it up from the 5% to about 8%. I'm going to turn it right down to about 30%. I'm just going to go in with that yellow, tap it a few times around the sun. And you can see it's starting to bring like a yellow halo around it, which is perfect, like that. A few more times. Then stay on the same layer, reduce this down to about 2% size, and I'm just going to use this now. In fact, it's too strong, so I'm going to reduce it down to about the 15% strength, and just start tapping in now and gently brushing in. So although I've got it on 15% strength, I'm actually pressing really lightly as well. So if you're quite heavy-handed, then move it down even further, put it to like 10% or 5%, whatever allows you to gently tease in some extra small textures around that sun to increase the areas like this. And we can do a couple of extra ones lower down as well, but I'm going to preserve them mainly slightly in the upper region. I think that will work a little bit better. I'm going to just increase it up to 10% size and just tap it a couple more times and then maybe a bit more to like 13%, tap out a couple more just to extend some of that yellow. Then I'm going to create another layer, and it doesn't matter if it's on top because it's on the add instead of normal, then it actually becomes translucent to anything that's lighter. So we're going to put about 20% size and still on the 10% strength, and just tap that a number of times there. Increase it up to 30%, 1, 2, 3 taps, increase it up to 50%, a couple of taps, and just stop, have a look. How is it affecting it? Up to about 70%, 2 taps, I think that's probably sufficient. Then I'm going to go back to my yellow layer and the yellow color, and then I need to bring in the yellow and the red together a little bit more, so maybe about 30% for that, and then a couple of more taps with the yellow just to start to blend them together. Okay, we're going to create some new layers. So we're going to go to layer 11 where we had the land or the grass feature. We're going to create another layer above that. I want to keep all of the sun features and the light features on top. Anything I do now is going to be underneath that. So layer 15 is actually underneath all the sun layers. So this time we're going to move with this soft brush initially, and the colors I'm going to be using are these 2 colors down here to begin with. So go for the darker tone on the soft brush, and we'll put it down to about 3% size and around 15% strength, 15% opacity, and I'm just going to start building in some hints of different sort of stripes and different areas of dark tone in the water. So I'm going to have a section over here where it's a little bit darker, and then maybe reduce it down to 2%, and then maybe just a kind of section up here. So you're going to have different areas of the water where it's disturbed, and you get different kind of tones emerging. So different bands of the water, really, something like that. And then we're going to stay on the same layer and go to this next color at the bottom row. I'm just going to put it at the 3% again, and we can just start building in some more of these different tones. Don't want so much of the bright blue showing through. I want some slightly more muted colors, so I'm just bringing in bands of this, cutting across. Don't have to be particularly neat at all, and a lot of this is going to be obscured by the grass and mounds anyway, so don't worry too much. I'm going to create a new layer, and still it's under all the suns, but it's above that. Now we're going to change brushes. We're going to go to the artistic brush, leatherwood brush, tap on the brush, and you can see I've put the spacing up to 40%, which is really important for this. The color I'm going to be using is this first blue here. We're going to put the size up to 2%, as you can see it really clearly, but we're going to turn the opacity down to about 40%. And we're just going to now start bringing in this blue, especially into the dark areas that we've created. And we want to just create some, obviously, movement in the water and texture. And we want to create sort of sweeping movements all the way across. So try to keep it as loose as possible, backwards and forwards, through the water. And you're trying to keep it in straight lines as much as possible. If it goes a bit obviously too far out in any areas, then just delete them and try again. Now you can obviously press and hold and it'll snap to a straight line. If you feel more comfortable building it up like that, then you can do. However you feel more confident, really. And you want to just keep building it up into layers of texture. And we're also going to go in here with the blur tool as well. So if it feels like it's too much in focus in some areas or too defined, then that isn't really a problem. We're just going to turn it down to the lower part, 2% for some areas, perhaps in the distance. And then even lower into the 1% for the very top, perhaps, just if you want to get a hint of some textures in there. We can go back in and we can further refine this. So maybe I use a variance of all those different brush sizes, especially at the top. So the 1% for the kind of distant stripes. And some of these are a bit too crystal clear, so we're going to go in and soft focus them, blur them in. But you can just really start to build up different layers of different textures. Put it back up again into the 2%, and I'll just build it in a little bit more over here. And if you want some areas where perhaps it just gathers together a little bit more and you get a bit more of a concentration, you can just keep going over that in some areas. And then further down, we're going to start getting more stripes and almost like ripples in the water anyway. So it's not quite looking right yet, and that's fine. So we're going to go to the Gaussian Blur, and we're going to switch it here, because if you just keep it on there, it will be on the layer rather than being able to control it. So I'll put it back to 0. The little arrow, tap it, and you can go to the pencil instead. Now you can control the size of the pencil, so it's on the same brush, although you could select, for example, an airbrush and soft brush. That could work. You can choose the size and the strength. If you put it up to 100% strength, it's going to blur a ridiculous extent. So we don't want that. We want it quite subtle. So somewhere down, probably around 20%, is going to be quite strong. Choose a sensible size, so somewhere around the 3 or 4% size, I would say. And you can just go in there and you can soften bits as you choose. Some bits perhaps you want to be a bit more focused. Perhaps we'll turn that up to about 30% even. Be a bit braver. So we don't want all of it to be massively in focus, and obviously you can press lightly with this too, just to gently kind of bring out that blur. We can always go over this again and bring out some more texture. So we're getting like a base level of texture in first, and then we can always go in and further refine certain bits that we feel like we've gone a bit too soft. So we can just control that initially. Okay, so that will do initially. Maybe we should make another layer on top, go back to our artistic leatherwood brush, and again reduce it down to the sort of 2% size, maybe 30% opacity, and we can go in and define some of these textures again in some areas. So maybe a bit more selective this time, maybe not do as much. And we can just bring in a little bit more focus in areas where we want it rather than absolutely everywhere. And these kind of textures, they're difficult to replicate, but it's getting a little bit closer than, trying to do every little point of texture by hand anyway. I'm going to put this up to 3% size, and you set the opacity wherever you want. So it's currently was on 30, so I'm going to put it down to 20. That way we're building it in a little bit more subtly perhaps. We're using mainly the dark colour at the moment, but I can go in and add some texture to this with a lighter colour too in a moment, just to really further blend it in. So down to the lower part of 2% for some of the more distant sections like this. Then I'm going to switch colours. I'm going to go for this lighter colour down here. I'm going to put it up to about 40%, keep at the 2% size, and I'm just going to start building in some more with this texture now, with this colour rather. Just start to soften in some of these stripes, perhaps they're a little bit too strong. We can knock them back a little bit. Let's increase the size up to that, to 3%. We're going to get a bit more dramatic with some of this texture. Why not try 4% even? Yeah, 4% works really well, especially as we're getting closer to us. That starts to get more the kind of effect I think we're after. And then we can alternate it again back to the blue. Probably reduce it down to the 25 with the blue, but we're still on the bigger size, more importantly. And then this bigger size creates these bigger gaps, which works a little bit better for more the foreground textures. And like I said, just reduce it down. If you just want to go in and just, that's still too big, let's turn it down to the 1% size. And if you just need to go in and further, just create little points of stripes of focus in the distance. You could even try with a different brush for this. So maybe you could go back to the airbrushing and the medium brush, reduce it super low to the 1% size and 10% opacity, and just start building in some sort of sharp lines of focus within the water. Added to the mix. Like this. So we're going to create another layer on top. So we've got lots of layers to this picture. We're going to stay on the, well actually no, we'll go to the soft brush, and with this layer property we're going to change it from an N to the add again, because we're going to add some highlights for the sun in the water area. So we're going to go to the red colour, 3% size and really low on the opacity at around 10%, and I'm just going to build in gradually, gently, some of this red colour into these areas. And I'm just doing it in stripes left to right, all the way down. It's going to be covered at the bottom by grass anyway, but we'll just build it in, and that just gives us the base. Then we're going to switch back to the artistic leatherwood, and we'll probably stay on the same layer, but we'll switch to the yellow. And for this, we want to be a bit bigger, so top end of 2%, and we're on, well, it's too big, so we're gonna, or too strong, rather, I'll put it down to about 15% strength. Let's just test that. That feels about right, and then we can just go in and add some of this yellow into the mix, so it really creates the highlight, whereas it also creates or preserves some of that texture. And then maybe we can just increase the strength up to about 30% for some of these nearer textures. Perhaps increase the size up to 3% as well, so we're getting slightly bigger. Like this. And then this is going to be obscured anyway, so don't need to worry too much about that. Let's turn it back down again to the 2%. I feel like I need a little bit more in this area, here, and then reduce it down again to the maybe the 1% even. So for this distant area, we're getting the smallest level of texture. In with the 2%, just a little bit more on the distance. What we're on strength wise, 30% is about right, I think. Just to add a bit more in kind of bands. It's important to create breaks here too. And then as we get nearer to us, up to more like the 3%, and that works better. Okay, switch back to the airbrushing soft brush and the red color, and I just want to further surround all of that yellow in this red, so 3% size and 10% opacity. So I'm just going to further enhance some of that glow in the water. Don't want to do too much, just to give the effect like that. Okay, so that will do for most of the water at this stage. So I'm going to create another layer on top, and this is now going to create the mounds and the other grass areas. So we're going to switch to the medium brush initially, go to these colors now. So I'm going to go to the middle color of those dark colors, and with a 4% size and about 50% opacity, I'm just going to start building in some sections here, some blobs that are going to represent the same kind of things we have in the distance, but these are obviously the foreground versions. So I don't need to be too precious about these initially. We're going to create textures on top of them as well. So we'll just create a couple here, and then something over here, another set of forms, and then just bring it over here. And then we can have really a more foreground base area. So let's just get rid of this bottom section. We're going to have something where the foreground grass is going to grow from. So we'll just block that in really simply like this. We're not going to see much of this water either. We may also stay on the same layer for this, but I'm going to change brush. I'm going to go to my inking technical pen. So with this technical pencil, we're going to have it around 10% size and, well, about 50% opacity. And we'll just zoom in for this area, and you can see that I'm really starting to bring out texture here now. And you can see now that it's going to just make sense of much of this detail. And keeping them quite tightly packed for the distance. I'm not going to agonize over those. I'm just going to build up that effect fairly quickly. The bottom edge can be a lot flatter. So just along that top edge, you don't really want to notice too much in the way of individual blades of grass. You're just using it to soften up that top edge like that. And then as we get the ones that are slightly nearer to us, you might notice slightly taller, more distinct blades of grass perhaps. And this is a time-consuming element, but the more time you spend on just getting this feature right, I think it will look good. And I'll come back to that, but I'm just going to show you for the bottom section. So for the bottom section, I'm going to put it up to about 20% size, as you can see like that. And perhaps I'll turn the opacity up as well to 100%. And then all the foreground grass is going to be created like this. And it's a really nice brush because, you know, it naturally thins out and tapers at the end of the stroke, which is great. So we can just spend a few minutes just building up this texture. Much of this foreground grass is going to obscure these mounds anyway, so I'm going to do this layer first probably, this foreground grass first, and we could even go to a darker brush. So we've got a slightly darker black here, and we could add that on top. Subtle, but it will make a bit of a difference. Change the angle of the grass. It will clump together in places, but then it overlaps obviously too. Really don't spend too long trying to perfect the exact angles of these. Just move quickly, build up the effect as quickly as you can, double it over, and then the top edge really is what you're after, because if you move further down and just keep going over that, then it will fill it in, and because you're moving downwards and just filling in this bottom section, eventually it's just becoming like this. You can just scribble over this bottom section. In fact, it's only really that top texture that we're looking for. Beyond that, we don't need to really be too concerned. So I'm just filling in now the bottom area, and then wherever I feel like the grass is going to be visible, I'll just go in there and just take a little bit more care. And having some gaps through so you can see a little bit is going to be important, so don't block it in completely. And I'll do this section over here too. And then obviously we have some mound areas now that are still visible, so we'll need to go back in with perhaps a lighter. So we've got this lighter colour, and we'll just turn the opacity down to about 70%, and the brush size down as well, back down to about 10%. And we just need to go back in perhaps and just finish adding some of this texture. So this is the lighter green. You can use that in places. If it's too light, you can just go back to the middle colour anyway, which is the initial grass colour we're using. So maybe a combination of those two. And it's a similar effect to what we just created, but obviously a more distant version of it. Now if we go back in with the eraser, set to a airbrushing and soft brush, and have it at the 2% size and the 50% opacity, and we can just start to tidy up some of these bottom edges. We put them in pretty roughly initially, but we do need to perhaps just tidy them up a little bit if they seem a little bit strange in shape. So you can really go in and just make them work better for you. Having said that, they're going to need shadows too. So again, I might as well stay on the same layer. I'm going to go to this dark blue colour that we had before, go to the soft brush, have it about 2% size and about 5% opacity. It's really quite low. And we just want to gradually build up some shadows for these mounds, just soften them in a little bit more. Okay, I'm just going to go back to the water layer. So with the medium brush now, on the layer 17 that had the water texture, I'm just going to put it at around 1% size and around 50% opacity. And at this lower section, I'm just going to start introducing some stripes, especially lower down here in this water area. You're not going to see it too much, but it just gives the sense of some ripples coming in at the edge. I'm going to do some down here as well. Like that. Okay, I could definitely spend longer on some of the features like the clouds and the grass texture, but I think that has got us to the general effect. If you've enjoyed watching this, please make sure to hit the thumbs up, press that subscribe and also the bell notification. Thanks for watching, I'll see you again soon.